about getting this old is that the world becomes very quiet, not just outside, but inside too. You sit in a room long enough and the noise of your life starts settling to the bottom like dust in a jar. All the years, all the choices, all the things you thought mattered begin to drift down until the water clears and you can finally see through it. That's when you notice the things you missed the first time. And the truth I arrived at, sitting here in this small living room with the same clock ticking on the wall it's been ticking on for 40 years, is that the thing I was proudest of for most of my life was also the thing that cost me the most. My greatest success, the one everyone congratulated me for, the one people used to point at when they said, "You did well for yourself," turned out to be my greatest failure. I didn't see it when I was younger, not in my 30s, not in my 40s, not even in my 60s. It took 81 years for the math of my life to finally come out even. When I was 26, I got my first real promotion. Back then, that word meant everything to me. Promotion sounded like proof, like the world was finally recognizing that I mattered. I still remember the day my boss called me into his office and slid a paper across the desk with a thin smile. Assistant manager. It wasn't a big office and it wasn't a big company, but to me it felt like the door to everything had just opened. I went home that night with a bottle of cheap champagne. My wife Ellen was 24 then, standing in the kitchen with flour on her hands when I walked in. She asked what the occasion was, and I held up the paper like a winning lottery ticket. She smiled, a real smile, the kind people have before life starts sanding the edges off them. "We should celebrate," she said, and we did. But looking back now, that was also the night something small began shifting, and I didn't know it yet. Success is a funny thing when you're young. You think it's a destination, a point on the map where life finally becomes stable and satisfying. But what it really is most of the time is momentum. Once it starts, it asks for more hours, more attention, more sacrifice, and it rarely asks politely. By the time I was 35, I had climbed high enough that people at family gatherings would introduce me with a certain pride. Someone would say, "This is my brother, he runs the whole department." Or my father would clap me on the shoulder and tell people, "That boy works harder than anyone I know." At the time, those words felt like oxygen. I breathed them in. I stayed late, I volunteered for projects nobody wanted, and I told myself I was building something important. And in a way, I was. The company grew, my salary grew, our house got bigger, the cars got newer, and every year brought another visible piece of proof that the effort was worth it. But the strange thing about building a life around work is that the losses don't show up right away. They're quiet. They look harmless at first. A missed dinner, a birthday you arrive late to, a school play where someone saved you a seat but it stayed empty. I remember one evening very clearly. Our son Daniel must have been 8 or 9, and he had a small presentation at school about planets. Ellen reminded me twice that week, asking if I would be there, and I said of course because I meant it when I said it. But the day came and the office was chaos, contracts falling apart, people arguing in conference rooms, phones ringing non-stop. By the time I looked at the clock again, the presentation had already started. I told myself it was fine, that kids forget things quickly. But when I got home that night, Daniel was already asleep, and Ellen was standing at the sink washing dishes. I asked how it went, and without turning around, she simply said, "He looked for you." No anger, no lecture. Sometimes the quiet sentences do the most damage. I promised myself I'd do better next time, and I believed it. But success has gravity. The higher you climb, the harder it becomes to step away from it. In my 40s, things really took off, and I became vice president of the company. We moved again into a bigger house in a better neighborhood where neighbors talked about investments and vacations and places I had never heard of growing up. People shook my hand and told me I must be proud of what I'd built, and I was. I truly was. But pride is a tricky companion. It can sit beside you while other things quietly slip out the back door. Daniel stopped asking if I'd come to his events. Ellen stopped reminding me about them. Our dinner conversations grew shorter. Not hostile, just thinner. You don't notice these changes when they're happening because they arrive slowly, one quiet adjustment at a time, and you assume there will be time later to repair them. That assumption, more than anything else, was the biggest lie I ever believed. I thought time later would be waiting for me. It wasn't. The turning point didn't come as a dramatic moment with shouting or slammed doors. It came on a Tuesday evening when I was 68 years old. I had finally retired after 40 years of long hours, boardrooms, and endless deadlines. I walked out of the building with a plaque in my hands that said, "Thank you for your leadership." People shook my hand, someone gave a speech, and I drove home feeling something I hadn't in years: relief. For the first time in my adult life, I believed I was about to have time, real time. Time for Ellen, time for Daniel, time to finally sit down and be present in the life I had worked so hard to build. But when I opened the front door, the house felt different. Ellen was sitting in the living room with a suitcase beside the couch. She looked tired in a way I hadn't noticed before, and said she thought we should talk. We had been married 44 years at that point. 44! And you'd think I would have known what was coming, but I didn't. She told me she had already rented an apartment. The sentence didn't make sense at first, and when I asked why, she looked at me with a sadness deeper than anger and said softly, "Because now you finally have time, but I don't have any left." Daniel lived 3 states away by then, and we spoke on the phone a few times a year, polite conversations, careful ones, the kind adults have with relatives they don't really know anymore. After Ellen left, the house felt enormous. All that space I once believed was proof of success suddenly became empty rooms. The promotions, the awards, the paychecks built a life that looked impressive from the outside, but inside it the chairs were empty. That's when the truth finally landed. Not all failures look like failure. Some of them arrive disguised as success. My career did exactly what I asked it to. It gave me status, security, recognition, but it quietly took the one thing I assumed would always be waiting: the people. At 81, the world has become very small. My mornings are slow. Coffee by the window, the same sparrows landing on the fence. Sometimes Daniel calls, sometimes he doesn't. Ellen remarried years ago, and I heard she seems happy, and strangely, I'm glad she is. Regret at this age isn't loud or dramatic. It's more like a quiet ache you carry around in your pocket, something you touch now and then when a memory drifts past. I don't hate the younger man I was. He was trying to build a good life and believed hard work would eventually make everything better. He just didn't understand the cost, and costs eventually come due. If you're listening to an old man talk like this, maybe it's because some part of you is wondering about your own life. I won't tell you what choices to make because everyone has their own road, but I will say this: the things that matter most rarely shout for your attention. They don't demand promotions or send urgent emails. They just sit quietly in the room waiting for you to notice them. And one day, if you're not careful, they stop waiting. I'm 81 years old and the world says I was successful, but when I look back across the years, I see a boy who wanted to be a good husband, a father who meant to show up more often, a man who thought he had time.
And the strangest part of getting old is realizing that sometimes your greatest achievement was also the thing that took everything else away. If this story meant something to you, then I'm glad it found you. That's about all an old man can hope for now.